Every year, the idea of gaming evolves. What started out as nerdy kids sitting around an SNES has morphed into a global industry, connecting people from all over. Ranging from the former Goliath of World of Warcraft all the way to gamifying our walks using apps like Pokemon Go, Pikmin Bloom, or Ingress, gaming has never been easier or more accessible. With the world largely having moved on from stay at home orders during the COVID-19 pandemic, the moment of games selling as rapidly as something like Animal Crossing New Horizons has passed. Instead, we are encouraging a flock of gamers, specifically those interested in Stardew Valley like games, aka cozy games. 2022 has been a year for almost every gamer. Although we are going to be getting into some video game landscape analysis, we can't spend our time together only discussing the bad qualities of 2022. So I want to start off talking about some of the better things in the year. I think there was a lot wrong with this year, but there was also a lot of really good stuff. And one of the things that was great, in my opinion, is roguelites, and specifically cooperative roguelites. We don't see a lot of cooperative roguelites sort of on the scene throughout really what would have been the beginning of people enjoying more roguelites. Things like Nuclear Throne or Enter the Gungeon was sort of where we all started. Something like Ship of Fools and Played Up, two phenomenal and really well done roguelites, hit the scene in 2022. And I think it was a great way to bring people more into the genre and the industry. You know, experiencing things, but those weren't the only good roguelites to hit the scene this year. We had a lot of inspired games as well. We had something like Sifu, which took roguelike elements but wasn't necessarily a roguelike, and that was ended up nominating for Best Indie Game of the Year. And in my opinion, one of the best games of all time, but it's fine. We're not going to talk about that. And we have these games that are available on so many platforms and for so many people. And it kind of becomes like this almost like amalgamation of all of these roguelites and all of these things that we really get to experience. And now it's starting to feel like it's an actual genre. And I think for a lot of people, like, we really loved it and it was a really niche thing in a niche community. But now we have the experience and the opportunity to see so many new developers stepping into this zone. And it's really cool to see. We saw it in Hades, which I believe was a 2020 release, maybe a 2021 release. Hades was, I remarked in someone's Twitch stream, I do not remember who it is. I remarked in a Twitch stream, though, that, you know, why did the cozy gamers all of a sudden, like, jump into something like roguelikes, like Hades? Because Hades is not an easy roguelike by any means. It's complicated, and there are a lot of things to do in it, and a lot of management that you have to use. And they said, well, it's because they wanted sexy games. The cozy people came and said, give me a sexy character and I'll play your game. And Hades responded, and they responded very well. And so you have Hades bringing people in. And then this year you also had Cult of the Lamb. And they're the cozy gamers and the Stardew-esque Valley gamers have been branching into roguelikes now. And it's quite amazing to see, and to see this growth in the industry, because what everyone kind of was brushing off and thought that, oh, it's just not like that serious of gamers. They're like the Farmville girls now have grown up, right? That's what's happened. These people that have been playing these farming simulators for so many years, probably branching all the way back to something like Harvest Moon, Animal Crossing, all of that, there is a space for them outside of that in gaming, and they're starting to find their footing in playing more serious games, even something like Fortnite, and branching out into first-person shooters. It's very validating, I think, for a lot of people that, you know, they would have been made fun of for being just a gamer girl for so long. And it's validating to see that these people are contributing a lot to that part of the gaming community, and they're starting to contribute in other ways than just, and it's fine. If you just want to enjoy your Farmville games, you just enjoy your Farmville games. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's great. And on that note, you know, contributing more, like seeing people step in different genres, we saw something like God of War Ragnarok, which was the best-selling God of War of all time. They broke some records actually for Sony. I believe they set pretty much all the first-person records in terms of the title that sold the most. To see that so late in a franchise, and especially a franchise that has been rebooted, is first of all phenomenal. That's amazing. That means that you're picking people up midway through the game, right? Something like there are people who haven't played the God of War 2018 who are now playing God of War Ragnarok, and there are people who haven't played the God of War 1, 2, 3 who are now playing God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. So they're sort of like all over and like coming in from like all these different areas, and they're starting to bring in more gamers. And of course, God of War won so many awards. They really did, like at the Game Awards. And these are things that, yeah, they definitely should have won. Accessibility, especially. God of War Ragnarok set a new standard in a sense for accessibility. If you look at like the pages and the amount that you have to like filter through of what do you want to do, you want to talk about diversity and accessibility in gaming, God of War Ragnarok is it. And that's a really weird thing to say, I think, for a lot of people. You would expect something like that to maybe be like not in like a RPG action adventure fighting game, but in maybe like a game more like, let's say, Bear and Breakfast, right? Like one of the smaller indie titles who has really thought through these things. And instead, God of War Ragnarok stepped up and said, you better watch out, bitch, I'm coming for you. I'm gonna do this now, right? I've got this. But we can't talk about the Game Awards without briefly mentioning Elden Ring. And this isn't gonna be brief, because here's something that I spend a lot of my time talking about how award seasons, it actually does matter when you release your product, whether it is the Academy Awards, whether it is the Game Awards, whether it is the Golden Globes. When your content hits, gives you a better indication of whether your product will do well at the awards show, regardless of the quality of that product. That's why certain movies that want to be pitched for award seasons only launch like in like the September, October era, and they hit all the circuits, they do all the film festivals, and then all of a sudden you've got these weird movies batting for the Oscars when you have something like Pig 2021 starring Nicolas Cage that gets no awards and came out in February and it was perfect for the Academy circuit. But it's fine. It's fine. Elden Ring, funny enough, I was actually looking up stuff today about this game, released February 25th, 2022. Now, I haven't done the research into this, but it also won most anticipated game in 2021 and 2020, which is something that really blew me away because I didn't hear about Elden Ring until like 4 months before its release. I am not a Souls-like follower. I'm not like dedicated. I'm going to play every Dark Souls, every Bloodborne, every whatever. That's not who I am as a person. I have a lot of respect for the game and I really like the games. However, I think it's really cool that a game that is so tough and pushes people so much actually has the opportunity to win something like that, right? And to be put on such a big stage. And I think it's a huge thing for the Bandai Namco studio, despite the fact that they've done so many games in the past and they're a very well-established company. It's very cool to see a lot of these gamers that have been playing Souls-like games actually get to enjoy something like this. Last but certainly not least, on sort of the good side of what happened this year, is a game called High on Life. High on Life is a brand new IP for Microsoft, and it was actually purchased from Google Stadia, which has now being shut down. They were planning to have both The Quarry and High on Life as exclusives, and they purchased them and were working to publish them with those developers. However, Squanch Games suddenly found themselves without a place to publish their newest game. The studio had in the past released a Trover Saves the Universe, Dr. Splorchy Presents Space Heroes. Couldn't find any information about that game on the internet. That was a wild dive into a rabbit hole and accounting. But with their latest title, High on Life, it didn't receive the greatest reviews, but it did manage to hit the most played game on Xbox Game Pass. Xbox Game Pass has 29 million subscribers this year, which was a statistic released by Sony. But we'll get into that in just a moment. In something like Elden Ring, like when you have the difficulty level where it's all skill-based and it's not really like, there's a difference between an artificial difficulty, which is when something is put into the game to sort of give you a roadblock or to make it seem like just so infuriating. We've all come across it. It is something that is not balanced correctly. It is a weapon that is overtuned and you have to use only that specific weapon to get by something. It is, I don't want to say it's the puzzles in something like Legend of Zelda, where like you have to specifically use certain things because it technically is a puzzle, but sometimes Legend of Zelda does feel like it has an artificial difficulty to it. Maybe not so much in Breath of the Wild, but in like older games, there's a feeling of that kind of stuff. Like you are not hitting the buttons in the exact precise right moment, so then you end up with this weird difficulty that it doesn't seem like it's supposed to be there. But there are a lot of games, like modern games, that have been tuned so specifically. Super Meat Boy immediately comes to mind. The amount of love and dedication. If you guys have never seen Indie Game the Movie, holy crap. crap, that's one of the best films I've ever seen. Like, sorry, best documentary I've ever seen. I don't know if I'd put it in my top films, but definitely top documentaries. And there is a scene where one of them talks about how they were like getting to like the end of the development cycle, and he just like goes into the shower and like lays down and just like lets the hot water hit him until it runs cold, and then gets up and keeps going. He's like, we had so much pressure on us to deliver this game and deliver it correctly. But I digress. Getting back to difficulty, something like Super Meat Boy is a difficult game, but whenever you do something wrong, it feels like it's your fault, not the game's. Sifu feels extremely the same. It's a very technical fighting game, but it feels like I've done something wrong when I messed up. And I would say Elden Ring and Souls-like games definitely look the same way. I'm not saying that they are, and it's very easy to blame a game. It is what it is. We can't talk about, though, the good in a year without also balancing it with some bad. And although 2022 had certainly a lot of bad things in real life around the world, global events happening, it didn't have a lot really bad in the gaming industry in terms of games it delivered. There was a lot of drama outside in developer, in the console war hell that we've found ourselves in, but games that were being put out, there's probably never been a better time to be a gamer. These things are getting better every year. There's one game that I would like to specifically talk about, though. It is an independent stealth horror game. It is not the first entry in the series, and if I had to explain it to you in just a few words, I would say Disturbia the movie, but instead in a video game. That's right. We're going to talk about Hello Neighbor 2. I don't like this game. I'm mad. That's it. No, that's not it. Hello Neighbor 2 is a very interesting case because I've always been hesitant to speak poorly about the Hello Neighbor franchise because it's an independent game, and it's an independent studio that is scoping very large projects and trying to make very cool things and add a lot to the industry. And they've done it in one sense, but delivering a finished and good product to people on all these different platforms, they have not done. They have failed, and they have failed terribly. The first Hello Neighbor, just to set the stage a little bit, the first Hello Neighbor, which came out, I don't even know how many years ago now, the first Hello Neighbor was completely riddled with bugs. It was easy to completely cheese the puzzles. There is an intended way to do every puzzle and to see every stage, and then there is the way that you could just completely bypass everything. I did do that. I missed huge parts of the game because I just didn't care. I was like, I just want to get out of this living hell. I would like to be done now. But everyone I know who played the Hello Neighbor alpha and betas and were really involved in the community loved the franchise and have a big nostalgia for it because they helped figure out these puzzles together. They did it themselves. They all communicated and they gathered around and they were like, how are we going to do these puzzles? The first Hello Neighbor did not repeat any puzzle mechanics. It kept throwing new wild stuff at you. And every time I turned around, I did not know what was going on. It's like, this is not something that I've learned or something that I've been taught by this game. And a lot of good game development has to do with intuitive learning and figuring out how do we teach a player something without throwing them into a tutorial. Tutorials are fine and they have their place, and if that's the way that you want to introduce people to your mechanics, you absolutely can. But if you want to look at the prime and if you want to look at like the best way to introduce new players to mechanics, you need to look at the original Mario Brothers World 1-1. There's actually a video where they break down how they taught players that this is how you jump. They made them learn instinctually on the little blocks standing next to each other that you can jump from one to one, and it was safe. So if you fell, it didn't matter. But then all of a sudden they introduced another set of blocks, and these blocks had death below. And so if you missed, you died. And that introduces the concept you cannot leave the flat road that you're on. If you fall down, you are dead. You start again. And they introduce and layer all these tiny mechanics, and that's super important for small studios to understand, for big studios to understand, for everyone to understand, especially because I think when we make a lot of new games, and well, I don't make games, when other people make a lot of new games, I think a lot of people forget that some people still have never played video games, and we don't all have this rich history of going all the way back to something like the Nintendo Entertainment System or the SNES. We are where we are in terms of gaming. And some people played a few games on the N64 growing up and then never played anything again until the PlayStation 3. And that's totally fine. But then all that learned behavior that you would get from playing games in certain genres is usually not built in. And so certain games are very unfriendly to new players. Hello Neighbor 2. This is where this all came from. Hello Neighbor 2, like the first Hello Neighbor, I think should be described as a community experience rather than a game. And I think the really unfortunate thing is a lot of people are going to purchase the finished game rather than participating in the beta and alpha and helping the developers figure out how they want to build everything. So when you look at Hello Neighbor 2, the game was okay. I ran into a game-breaking bug. Didn't love it. If you are good at puzzle games, you'll be done this game within about 40 minutes, I think is the grand total for a lot of people, and it is a $30 game. For me, it was about 7 or 8 hours. I am terrible at puzzle games. Terrible at puzzle games. But listen, the game did get better from the first one. It actually improved a lot. And I think that that's what's like really cool to see is although I'm still angry at the developer's tiny build and I understand like his whole concept and the studio's whole concept is to build a franchise that will last. We are working on people's nostalgia and trying to sell a game based on like, hey, you really like the first game and you really like the experience. Do you want to do the whole alpha beta thing again? And then we're just going to release this random unfinished game for the world to enjoy. No, I really don't want to do that again. And yet I played it. I played it all. Great points about Hello Neighbor 2 is the developers learned a lot. They learned to repeat things. They learned to teach you slowly, and they learned to bring in sort of everything that we're learning. We've already spent 10 minutes on Hello Neighbor 2, and we've got a couple other topics to get to here. And tacking on to what I sort of said at the very beginning of this Hello Neighbor 2 tangent is we shouldn't be afraid to tell independent developers, you made a bad game. You fucked up. Like you really did. You need to fix what you're doing. Because these small studios probably need to hear it more than the big studios that can afford to fail a game and then release sometimes another failed game and then all of a sudden get it right. They don't have that backing and that financial availability to them that other people do. So hearing sometimes the harsh truth and the harsh reality of you didn't do a good job, it's necessary. Let's talk about though first-person shooters in 2022. What's going on? Let's broaden this up a little bit, okay? Let's talk about first-person shooters in the past, 4 or 5 years. Where are they? Because I'm not seeing them. The only thing that I'm seeing releasing are Battle Royales. Call of Duty Warzone, Battle Royale. Apex Legends, Battle Royale. Fortnite, Battle Royale. PUBG, Battle Royale. These are all Battle Royale games that, people want. I understand the appeal and the fun. I play Fortnite regularly. I love Fortnite. I think the no build zone is absolutely fantastic and they've done a lot to give back to their community. But in something like this, we're also still missing. It's hard not to blame Fortnite for kicking off the Battle Royales. It really is. It was so wildly popular and so famous and it still gets all these crazy sponsorships and kids love to play them. It's hard. It's really, really hard though not to miss the days of different modes. Of loading into a Halo game and seeing that you're getting to play VIP, right? What's that audio file? The guy who says, protect the VIP. It was exhilarating. It was exciting. Playing things like Oddball or Slayer or just all these cool different modes that we got in these quick first-person shooter games. I think that's another big difference of it. Sometimes you play a really long Fortnite round, and as an adult with a job, it's hard sometimes to sit down and commit for that amount of time and be like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. Any sort of branching off from that, we saw Valorant come out, and Valorant released. I think Valorant was probably the past 2 or 3 years from Riot Games, I believe. Valorant is. I don't want to say this too loudly, but Valorant is Counter-Strike but worse. That's all it is. Counter-Strike relies a lot on skill and tactical thinking in a sense. It's the most punishing, by far, the most punishing first-person shooter on the market ever. It's definitely one of the hardest ones to play. And someone took that, made it into a game with all these crazy wackadoodle superpowers and said, oh, we're good. Check that off the list. That's what we're doing here. And I think it's really hard. It's really hard to look at as someone who loves first-person shooters. I spent so long waiting for Halo Infinite, and although the Halo Infinite mess mostly belonged to 2021, so we'll leave some of that alone, Halo Infinite is nothing like what we were promised. We were promised a Halo that would span sort of the generations and stick with us for quite a while. And instead we got a Halo where the melee button is completely ruined. All they did was they made it so that you did not collide with other players in the game. They made it that you could walk through them. The point of this was they wanted to prevent griefing. And instead what we got is we got a completely ruined mechanic. The punch mechanic does not work well anymore, and it is not good to have that melee mechanic in the game. They've refused to change it. They've refused to add recollision into the game. They will never give us a co-op mode that they promised for Halo 5 and never came out for Halo 5 and now has not come out for Halo Infinite. And we were told that every Halo game going forward would have a cooperative campaign. We have not seen it. I don't think we're going to see it. They kicked out almost all of the high-end staff. They got rid of them because Halo Infinite was bad. They basically got rid of them because the game was bad and they ruined it. They took an amazing franchise that goes all the way back to Halo 1, right? Halo Combat Evolved. Everybody knows this game. Everybody knows the original trilogy of Halo. Halo 3, like, just shivers when you hear that choir singing the whole theme song, right? The way that it ended was so perfect and so beautiful. And then Bungie handed it over to Microsoft and said, here you go. And from there, it just went all downhill. We're starving for a good first-person shooter. And I don't think we're going to get one in 2023. And I don't think we're going to get one in 2024. I think it's going to be like 2026. And someone's going to say, I've got this. I can handle this. And that's when either a classic Call of Duty is going to come out, or like that actually plays really fun and like people want to be with, and it's not a pay to win scheme, or I don't know, for some reason Halo Infinite 2 comes out and all of a sudden we have this amazing, phenomenal thing. We did talk about Hello Neighbor 2 a little bit, the broken quality of the game. I would argue that Hello Neighbor 2 is less of a broken game though, although it does have a game-breaking bug that I was very unfortunate to experience. I would say it is less of a broken game and more of an unfinished game. I think it's to be argued that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is in a worse state than Hello Neighbor 2. Ooh, that didn't feel good to say. Where do I begin with Game Freak? What really happened at Nintendo? I have a lot of questions, actually. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. What has been passed on to me as information? And I'm not sure if this is correct, and I don't really have a way to verify this information, is that Pokemon has a 2-team development cycle going on. And so Team A is, let's say, working on Pokemon Arceus. And while Team A is working on Pokemon Arceus, Team B, so they've split them in half, Team B is now working on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Once Arceus is done development, because we can also talk about Pokemon Arceus and how they did not release a polished game at all. The frames were completely broken on the game. It was a good first attempt at open world, but I don't want to say it was a great attempt. Once they finished that and they decided they were going to launch it from what it was, they shifted them over to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and then some of the team from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has shifted on to whatever the next Pokemon project is. I don't know what it is. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, fastest selling game in Pokemon history. In Nintendo history? In title history? We're gonna have to fact check that one later. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sold 10 million copies in 3 days, which I think makes it the fastest selling video game of all time. And God of War Ragnarok, the polished, finessed, up for Game of the Year, sold 5 million in its first week. That says a lot. It says a lot to the power of a name of a game. And I think it just says a lot to Nintendo's power in general. And Nintendo can give us whatever they want to give us, and we'll take it. We'll just buy it. It's fine. I bought Scarlet. I love Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It's one of the funnest Pokemon I've ever played. And that's why it's really hard to talk about it, because it is one of the best Pokemon probably ever made. I think it plays the smoothest, but there are a lot of issues with it. One, you can't make a Pokemon game open world and then not correctly direct someone to where to go next. I've read a lot of theories as to why what happens. One of them is they wanted you to go back to school and you just never do. Like, nobody ever thinks, I'm going to go do school at Pokemon. That's the reason why I'm playing this game, is to relive my childhood days. I get it. It's a game meant for kids, but Game Freak knows, at least I think they know at this point, that a lot of their child target audience has since grown up significantly. And they are now at an age where they're in their like 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, and they're still playing Pokemon. They're still playing Pokemon. It's a good game. You can make a game that kids enjoy. Look at the old Mario games. Look at Pac-Man. Look at Tetris. Kids liked those games, and so did adults. These are timeless games, and both generations like them. There's nothing wrong with making a game have a bit more challenge, because kids are not bad. Kids are good at games. They have a quicker reaction time and they pick up things faster. They could figure it out. You can't make a Pokemon game that insanely tough. It would be pretty hard to make a Pokemon game that parents would have to like play for their kids or whatever, because their kids are so frustrated. So Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, aside from the frames not working, which was something that Arceus also had, they did not implement an open world correctly. I would have a really hard time believing that the developers went and played other open world games and games that have done it very successfully. Of course, Elder Scrolls Skyrim is an extremely successful open world game. Grand Theft Auto 5. There are a lot of titles out there where they could have seen what to do and improved upon it, if anything. So there are easy fixes. There's level scaling that could have been introduced. I went and fought the ice gym when I was like 15 levels under, and I was like, I chose the wrong gym, because the descriptions that they have for the gyms don't even make a lot of sense. Like, they'll be like, this person's like one of the most powerful, so you're like, that must be the last one, right? It'll say like along the lines of the most powerful. You're like, that's got to be the last gym, or that's going to be the last thing. And then all of a sudden you're like only in the middle of the pack, and you're like, ooh, why though? What happened, Game Freak? And when you speak to Nurse Joy and ask for information, Nurse Joy tells you where to go next based on your current location. So Nurse Joy's advice works if you've been following it the whole time. If you're like someone like me, you're just screwed over. You are where you are. Accept it and move on. Keep going. You can do it. Go fight some Pokemon in the area, and then you'll know what level you should roughly be. But it's a bit of a struggle. It's a bit of a struggle. I really think like going forward, I have more games like listed there, but I think like I've just talked about broken games for way too long at this point. The thing that I would love to see for the next like year, like 2023, is, for the love of everything, push a game if you have to. I do not care. Delay the game 2 years for all I care. 2 years. I just want to see a finished game. I just want to be able to pick up a game, enjoy the game, and not have to go online and talk about all the bugs in the game. That's not something that I want to see. And I don't really think it's an excuse to be like a smaller studio and not have testers or people like betaing your game. There are so many ways that you can do this now. You can do things like Steam Greenlight. You can do things like, I think even Xbox has early access games now. There are ways to put your games out there and get people to test them and even pay you to test them, rather than just like, ooh. We're going to talk about serious things here. We're going to talk about one of my personal favorite gaming companies. This is a company that I grew up playing all of their games for. It introduced me into like top-down dungeon crawlers, I guess you would call it, into the real-time strategy genre. It introduced me into MMORPGs. It's Blizzard. I have a lot of questions actually about this one, and one that like I've been rolling around in my brain for a long time is like, what happened here? Because in theory, Blizzard is, from the outside perspective looking in, Blizzard was a company set up for success. They had at the helm, they had Chris Metzen, they had Chris, the other Chris, whose name I can never remember. Oh my gosh, that's so bad. They had these big, well-known guys at the top, and they had made these phenomenal games. And then they were very careful in their hiring process, and they were strategic, and they picked this random guy, I'm pretty sure. It's Ion Hauzatokis, who, I hope I said his name right. Ion Hauzatokis. I'm not saying he's a good developer. This is not my argument here. They found him, I think, on EVE Online or EverQuest, one of the two. He was actually a raid leader in one of the high up guilds, and they approached him and said, do you want to help us work on World of Warcraft? This is what we're creating. It went from being this company that literally, like, I would say probably had close to as much power as Nintendo at one point. Like, they could just drop a game and everyone would gobble it up. And people probably still would. Like, don't get me wrong. I think people still play these games and are absolutely addicted to them. But the amount of players they had at peak World of Warcraft, which was over 12 million, it's gone. They stopped releasing numbers at some point. I think at the lowest we saw last, it was something like 2 to 5 million people subscribed, which is still a lot of money. But when you've been at the point and at the pinnacle of gaming and you had all these people and no one saw Final Fantasy coming. No one thought Final Fantasy: A Realm Reborn would be what takes down World of Warcraft. And World of Warcraft still exists technically. It's not taken down. Nobody thought that that would be it. No one thought this little RPG MMO where you play through this cutesy wootsy little story. I don't know the story. I don't think it's that happy. Where you play through this story and you get to play as like this bunny boy. No one truly looked at that and said, that's the threat. That's got to be it. That's the competitor. And out of nowhere, it's like everyone just left. Like the servers emptied on World of Warcraft. They were gone. And this was following probably their best expansion since Vanilla WoW. World of Warcraft Legion, way back in the day. I don't think this article exists anymore. There is a review that I published for World of Warcraft Legion. It was pretty scathing. It was pretty mean. I'm not going to lie. Coming off of, I think it was Warlords of Draenor right beforehand, coming off of that expansion and having such a bad taste in my mouth for World of Warcraft, I looked at the state of Legion and I said, this is not going to be a good expansion. There's no way they're going to keep people around. I can see the way that it's going to go already. It's going to be awful. I've never wanted to take down a review more in my life. Like I felt really bad because for the first time in a long time, the game was really fun. And we had this cool raid where like you went into the Emerald Nightmare and we finally got to see like all these things that we had wanted to see for so long, and the developers like, you can have it. And we had phenomenal storytelling. To be able to go anywhere on the map that we chose first and do all of the 5 sections in whatever way that we chose, you barely had to read the quest because you were given these beautiful cutscenes that were just absolutely breathtaking and propelled the game forward and the story forward in a state that we had never seen before in World of Warcraft. And they held your hand and they explained things to you, which was good because there's been like, 15 years of lore at this point, 15 plus. We have to take into account World of Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, all of the books, all of the comics, everything that's out there that most people never even get into, every single quest line that you can read out there. Hello? But they held our hand and they said, no, come with us. We're going to tell you a story. And the story slapped. The story slapped so hard. The part where I'm just going to nerd out a little bit. The part where Illidan is up with the Naru and the Naru basically says, like, I can make you whole. I can make you a good person again. And Illidan said, I don't want to be this way. And kills a literal god in that universe. Kills it. And says, no, I'm good. Thanks though. That was their way out, was that Naru and Illidan straight up said, I'm better than you. Phenomenal storytelling. But getting back to the point. World of Warcraft in 2021. In 2021, World of Warcraft was sued by the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, the DFEH. They made this absolutely scandalizing document, and they had spent their time and researched a lot of the standards that Blizzard had for their employees. They discovered a frat boy culture where women had to do a cube crawl on a regular basis, and men just watched them crawl through these cubes. Someone killed themselves because of the work environment there. And when this came out, I think the most shocking thing is that not a lot of people were fired. Not a lot happened. There are still sexual assault cases and sexual harassment cases coming out to this day. I think actually the last one was either December or October of 2022. Someone stepped forward and said, this is what was happening. I'm individually suing the company. They were made fully aware of the harassment that I was experiencing from my direct manager, and they did nothing. Pardon me? Like, it's still coming out. This is like a year and a half later. I don't know how long. I don't know if Blizzard employees are still on strike at this point. I couldn't find that information, but they were on strike for a very long time over this. After everything happened, there were men stepping forward and saying there are one in particular said there are 2 companies that I've worked for that I could not believe the environments in them. One was Blizzard Activision and the other was Twitch. And he went on to actually work for small independent companies, and he said, like, this was the best decision I made. Like, they're like a family and they actually treat you decently and you get to do what you love, which is creating video games. But Blizzard's response was not to clean house and to fix the issues inside, which takes time. Okay, it actually does take time, but they should be a lot more transparent than they are currently. Their response was leaking things like the diversity space method for Overwatch. It is a graph that has 6 or 7 different gauges for diversity. I believe it's age, body type, race, culture, accessibility. And they rate all of these characters internally based on they want to seem like they're a very diverse company, and they have a lot of forced diversity in these places where they could actually just make really cool characters that are diverse because they already have super cool characters. Torbjorn slaps. He's so cool. He's like some old German question mark? Maybe Swedish? I don't know. I don't know. But he's this cool, like, Scandinavian guy who's old. He's got, like, this arm. He's got, like, that's, like, a wrench thing and a leg that's a wrench thing. And he's cool. We don't see characters like that all the time, and it's exciting to see. And you have so many females on the cast and, like, characters, like, persons of color. And they're just like, here's our diversity space method, and this is how we figured it all out. And they expected us to think that was a good idea. They expected us when they came out with that, and they were like, this is what we're doing. We were like, yeah, that's great. That's a really good idea. That's phenomenal. You've done so well. Congratulations, Blizzard. Really, truly. You did great. You did great. On top of Blizzard's egregious actions, their lawsuit that they're dealing with, their diversity, their forced diversity that they're attempting, trying to kind of put it on us to see them as a good company, we have, I guess, the new era of the console wars, if you want to call it that. The new beginnings of Sony and Microsoft's ever-growing feud. Has been here for a very long time. Something interesting happened a while ago. Sony released Microsoft's Game Pass numbers. They're currently at 29 million subscribers, which, if true, that means that in 2022 they grew, I think, about 4 million subscribers alone. That's a lot of people using that service. It's a great service. I recommend it to all of my friends, and I think it's a really fun way to try and experience a lot of games that we wouldn't normally play, and it also saves the consumer a lot of money. So Game Pass in the long run is extremely good for the consumer, at least, and I'm not entirely sure how it works for developers, but I'm assuming it's a relatively good deal, otherwise they would not be using it. Sony is refusing to release their numbers for PlayStation Plus. They are saying they are considerably behind Microsoft's numbers. This is interesting for actually a couple of reasons. One of them being Sony released this during the Activision and Blizzard acquirement by Microsoft drama that's going on. This is Microsoft attempting to acquire a very large company, and they have made several steps to ensuring people that they would not be making a lot of these games exclusives. They just wanted to have them for Game Pass, one of which being a 10-year roadmap for Call of Duty to keep it on several other platforms, which Nintendo has actually approved of and looked at and said, yep, that looks good, and Sony is refusing to accept. Sony has definitely raised their voice a couple of times and has asked the FTC to step in, and the FTC is challenging the acquisition. Microsoft still believes they're going to win. If Sony has that kind of pull, why would Microsoft just auto win that? Now, one of Microsoft's biggest counter to the argument that is being made by Sony is Sony has a lot of exclusives, and wanting to fuel the fire, Sony has now done what's known as stealth blocking. These are games that were supposed to be timed exclusives to the PlayStation 5 and 4, and I think they're possibly on the PC, but they were not supposed to become part of the Xbox XS series or Xbox One. They were not going to hit these platforms for quite a while of time. They have stealth blocked Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy XVI, Bloodborne, and a Silent Hill 2 remaster from coming to the Xbox. And in turn, Microsoft has responded by making 3 upcoming Bethesda games, likely Starfield, Redfall, and another unknown title. Those are going to be Xbox and PC exclusive. Sony, for a long time, we know they haven't been playing nice in the console space. They are the biggest selling console for most generations. The PlayStation 2 knocked everyone out of the water, like just dominated the space, and it's only continued to grow because a lot of gamers who were on the Xbox and perhaps were on the Xbox for the few exclusives that they had and the franchises that were worth considering, games like Halo and Gears of War, those games for a long time have either been done or have moved to Windows or haven't had really consistent releases, and they've also changed a lot over the years. So a lot of players have been moving towards the PlayStation because they also have the opportunity to play with their friends more and be on the same platform. Now, if you look at something like Fortnite, who wanted to do console-wide gameplay, like cross-platform gameplay, let's loop everyone in together, and they wanted to put all of the consoles in together. Sony, for a long time, and Fortnite did come out and talk about this, Sony declined. They didn't want to be a part of it. They didn't want to be in on that action, so to speak, and they just weren't playing nice. I think that's the best way to put it. So it's interesting to see that it's a very strategic move on Sony's part to put it sort of on Game Pass. There was a Forbes write-up a number of years ago where Forbes actually was arguing that Microsoft didn't care that the Xbox Series X and S were not selling as well as the PlayStation 5. And the argument basically is that Microsoft is attempting to dominate a different space, and they're going to be using Game Pass to do that. I think they've proven at this point that, yes, they were correct. If you look at the PlayStation Plus library in comparison to the Game Pass library, there are huge differences. And one of the advantages of Game Pass is that you can play it both on your PC and your Xbox. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can also play it on your phone. In an article published by The Verge on December 8th, 2022, the title is "The FTC is suing Microsoft to block its Activision Blizzard purchase." Now, we knew this was a thing. We talked about this a little bit in the podcast, but there's a very interesting quote from it, actually. So Holly Vidova, director of the FTC's Bureau of Competition, said in a statement, "Microsoft has already shown that it can and will withhold content from its gaming rivals. Today, we seek to stop Microsoft from gaining control over a leading independent game studio and using it to harm competition in multiple dynamic and fast-growing gaming markets." I don't know if irony is the correct word in this situation, but I find it extremely funny that this is the argument being made for Microsoft acquiring a company. If the argument was that Microsoft already has a monopoly in several other industries and they're very scared that that is going to happen, I feel like that would have a little bit more traction here. To hear something like that, and you think of things like the Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, right? We're going into these sort of weird niche areas where Microsoft has all these products that supply the need, and that's what you go to. That's what you get. They own a lot of those parts of different industries. That's not the argument that's being made out in the FTC by Sony, by anyone who's involved in this. The argument is Microsoft's holding games for just Microsoft. Xbox has almost no exclusives. One of the only exclusives that came out this year was High on Life. You see, like, actually, this is the argument? What is happening? The article further went on to say Microsoft's frustrations over Sony's objections to its Activision Blizzard deal have been clear. To quote Brad Smith, Sony has emerged as the loudest objector. It's as excited about this deal as Blockbuster was about the rise of Netflix. I think that's a great quote, and I think that's a great way to end that topic, because I'm actually just floored in a sense that that this is what the argument is, and I'll continue to just be shocked by it. I think is I don't think there's a lot of grounds in it, and I don't think it should be dragged out as long as it should. And I think that adding Blizzard and Activision Blizzard games to Game Pass would just, again, benefit the consumer more than anything. What I would personally like to see in 2023, we touched on these subjects a little bit throughout the podcast tonight, but I think getting developers to the point where they're publishing finished games would be my number one. I think that's my biggest ask right now from the gaming community, is that we are just getting finished games. I think there are a couple ways to achieve this and to get to this point, one of which would be everyone needs to stop pre-ordering games. When you pre-order a game, you are telling this developer, hey, no matter what, I'm gonna love it, I'm gonna buy it, I'm gonna eat it up. Most places don't have a refund policy. Steam, I think, is one of the only places where you can actually get a refund, maybe on the Epic Games Store, but I'm not sure of the restrictions there. We can't tell the developers we hate the game, basically. That's a problem. We need to be able to give more open feedback and get developers earning our money. We are in a capitalist society. We are in a capitalist society, okay? Your money speaks all of your opinion. If you purchase something that is not completed, you're telling them that's okay. When I purchased Pokemon Scarlet, I told Nintendo, it's okay, you gave me a crappy Pokemon game. I'm gonna buy it, I'm gonna enjoy it, I'm gonna play it. Things like Kickstarter, something like Steam Greenlight or an early access game, when you purchase them, you're saying, hey, I'm okay with this broken game. They actually give you warnings, I think, on the Xbox early access purchase that you have to be okay with the state that the game is currently in. Are you okay purchasing a broken game? And if the answer is yes, then all the power to you. Go buy your broken games. I want something polished. I want developers to either take features out. In the case of Banjo-Kazooie, I think maybe Banjo-Tooie, they took out a cooperative feature that they knew they couldn't finish in time because they were not allowed to push the game anymore. So either take out your broken features, don't give them to us, tell us, sorry, they were broken and I didn't want to push this game again. Maybe I'll add it in a future update. We are at the point now where people can give us and provide us with updates, or you need to push your game. These are the two solutions that I'm seeing here. Developers, like, please. It's all we're asking for. It's all we're asking for. I think there is a huge need as well in 2023 for a proper first-person shooter to come out. I'd love to see an updated version of Halo Infinite where our blocks work correctly, where we can melee, we can have a good time, we can have some fun, or just any other company, really. Please, someone. I'll take a Call of Duty at this point. I will take a Battlefield. Please give me a non-pay-to-win Slayer-type mode with things like Oddball, VIP, Capture the Flag. That's all I want to see. King of the Hill. I never thought I would say this, but I think Call of Duty actually needs to get their butt in gear and release some more games, because we don't have any options of any. No, I don't want a battle pass. I want to pay full price for a shooter. No battle pass, no DLC, just that. You can give me a map pack, that's fine. I think map packs sort of kind of eventually ruined the industry, but it's okay. It's okay. We don't need to talk about it tonight. We can talk about it another night. Non-broken games, first-person shooter, and I would just really like to see a little bit of accountability for developers, and I think journalists as well. One of the reasons why I'm starting this podcast and why I want to talk about these things is because I don't think journalists are doing their jobs anymore. And I think that's a huge problem. They aren't stepping up. They aren't making interesting features like they used to. There used to be some really cool stuff that came out. And even if it was just talking about like the history of these games, it was either Polygon or Kotaku made this absolutely phenomenal, like, this is the history of Mario, and it was interactive and you could scroll and there were all these cool graphics and we really saw all these amazing things, and we just don't get stuff like that anymore, and nobody wants to speak up and do these things for tons of reasons. I think one of them is still the lasting impacts of the Games Journal Pro List and Gamergate and everything that happened there, and I don't think that's going to go away for a long time. So I think it is up to content creators on different platforms, things like TikTok, Twitch, YouTube. They need to speak up and start talking about everything that's going on in the industry, because until we do and we start having these conversations and actually trying to benefit from them and make an impact with them, it's just not gonna.